Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me get my first 1,000 subscribers. It's one click for you, but for me it's a huge encouragement and motivation. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's go. My name is Emily and I'm 29 years old. I have been married to Jason for 5 years now, and honestly, until recently I was sure that our life was almost perfect. Jason is a kind, devoted, and attentive husband. We built a home that became our shared sanctuary where it was always cozy and peaceful. Every day was similar to the previous one, but I always considered this a sign of stability, not routine. That all changed when a new employee, Michael, joined our company. For the first time I noticed it on the general meeting. Tall, confident, with a slight smile on his lips, he looked like a man who always knows what he wants. Our gazes met for a few seconds and I felt something strange inside me. It was like a slight thrill, which I immediately pushed away, convincing myself that it was just a momentary weakness. Michael was the type of man who drew attention to himself with his confidence. He was always the center of attention, easily making conversation, joking, and his laughter echoed around the office. I watched him from a distance, trying to keep my distance, but every time our gazes met, I felt a shiver run through my body. The feeling was new and frightening, but at the same time it was appealing. One day after work he came up to me out of the blue. We had both stayed late finishing a project. The others had already left, and the office had fallen into a pleasant silence. I was sitting at my desk, tired but satisfied with the work I had done, when I heard his footsteps behind me. "Emily, are you still here?" His voice sounded sudden but calm, as if we had known each other for a long time. I lifted my head and met his gaze. He was standing right in front of me with the same slight grin that had now become something of a danger signal to me. "Yes, I'm finishing my report," I replied, trying to keep my voice as indifferent as possible. "Do you always work this hard?" His tone was slightly mocking but not angry. He sat down on the edge of my desk, studying me. "Well, someone has to," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. But he didn't laugh. Instead, his gaze became more serious and I felt the air between us grow tense. "You know, I've been meaning to tell you for a long time," he started, and I froze, not knowing what to expect. "You're incredibly beautiful, Emily." The words were so sudden that I was speechless for a second. I was used to compliments from Jason but not from Michael. It was different. Something flared inside of me and I felt my cheeks begin to pin. "Thank you, Michael," I managed to squeeze out, looking at my laptop. That's good to hear." "Emily," his voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. "Have you ever thought that life could be brighter?" The question caught me off guard. I looked up and met his gaze. There was something appealing in his eyes, something that made me wonder. I knew I shouldn't let myself go down this path, but something inside me was pulling me towards him. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "That life shouldn't be predictable," he smiled, and I felt my heart beat faster. "Sometimes you have to let yourself be a little spontaneous, don't you?" He leaned toward me slowly and I felt his presence even more acutely. Every word he said, every gesture penetrated deeper, and I realized I was starting to lose control. It was dangerous. I knew I should stop, but instead I said, "And how do you propose to make my life brighter, Michael?" His smile grew wider and he finally pulled away, leaving me confused. "Maybe you'll find out next week. We're having a company party, remember?" He stood up from behind my desk, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "Maybe we'll discuss it there." I nodded, unable to get a word out. He walked away, leaving me alone in the half-dark office. My heart was pounding frantically in my chest, and my thoughts were whirling around in a mad whirlwind. What was that? What did he mean? When I got home, Jason was already asleep. I stood in the dark bedroom and stared at his calm face. He was so calm, confident in our future, and so was I. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, thinking about what awaited me at that ill-fated party and what might happen next. The corporate party turned out to be even bigger than I expected. The huge hotel banquet hall that our company had rented for the evening was filled with people, happy conversations, and music. I tried to focus on socializing with my coworkers, but my thoughts kept returning to Michael. He had been bothering me ever since he left the office that night. Jason, as usual, couldn't accompany me to these events. His job didn't allow him to go out much, and I understood that. But on this night, his absence felt especially acute. I knew this night would change things, and yet I couldn't stop myself. The conflict between duty and desire raged inside me, but perhaps that was just an excuse for what was to come. When I entered the hall, Michael was already there. He was standing in the center of a group of employees, smiling and chatting casually with them. But as soon as he noticed me, his gaze lingered on my face a little longer than usual, and in his eyes I saw the very spark that had ignited our office. I felt my heart beat faster. I tried to hide my excitement by pretending that I had just come to chat with my coworkers. Michael and I exchanged only brief greetings, but every word, every touch of his hand on mine at the moment of greeting felt like an electric shock. We both knew it was more than just an accident. The evening went on and the alcohol poured out in rivers. I couldn't help but notice that Michael was avoiding my company, but his appearance gave away his thoughts. He didn't approach me, but I knew he was watching my every move. I could feel it in my skin. For a moment, I wondered if I even needed to be here. Glancing at my watch, I decided it was time to leave. But as soon as I took a step toward the exit, Michael was already there. He appeared so suddenly that I almost shrieked in surprise. "Are you leaving?" His voice was quiet, but there was an unfamiliar confidence in it. "Yes, I think I should go." I tried to look nonchalant, but I could feel the tremor in my voice betraying me. "Emily, take your time. We've barely spoken all evening." He leaned toward me slightly, and his words seemed to become more personal. "Can we stay a little longer? I promise it won't be boring." I hesitated. Part of me was screaming that I should get out of here as fast as possible, that no good would come of this. But the other part, the darker and more secretive part, was drawn to Michael like a magnet. In the end, I decided to stay just to see how this would end. "Okay," I said, trying not to look him in the eye. "Just for a little while." He smiled, and I noticed the way his gaze softened. We moved to the bar, where he ordered us each a glass of wine. It was unexpectedly strong, but I didn't mind. Perhaps that was what helped me relax a little. "You know," he began after a couple of sips, "I always thought you were different from everyone else." "You're different, Emily. You're reserved, but that doesn't make you boring, quite the opposite." "What do you mean by that?" I looked at him with slight suspicion. "I think there's something hidden in you, something you're afraid to show the world yourself." His words were like a knife blade, penetrating to the very core of my inner conflict. Maybe I was wrong. I didn't know what to say. His words struck a nerve. I felt as if he could see right through me, as if he knew all my innermost thoughts and desires. But how could that be? We barely knew each other, and he could already read me like an open book. "You must think about me too much, Michael," I tried to joke, but I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. "Maybe," he agreed, "but I have a feeling I'm not wrong. There's something wild and unpredictable about you. Maybe you just don't know how to express it." The words made me freeze. I felt my heart race, and a wave of emotion rose in my chest. I knew he was playing with fire, and I was in that fire. But it couldn't stop. Michael invited me to come out onto the terrace. I couldn't refuse, and we found ourselves alone under the starry sky. The cold night air was sobering, but it wasn't enough. His proximity was maddening. "Emily," his voice became even softer, almost a whisper. "Did you ever think that life could be different? That you could live not by the rules, but by your own desires?" "What do you mean?" I was trying to figure out where he was going with this. "I mean, sometimes you have to let yourself be yourself." He looked me straight in the eye, and I felt like I was losing control of the situation. "Is that what you want?" I couldn't answer. Inside me was a struggle between duty and desire, between what was right and what I wanted. But his gaze, his words, his touch, all of it broke down my last barriers. And I surrendered. Michael leaned down and kissed me gently. His lips were warm and soft, and I felt the whole world around us disappear. It didn't feel right, but it didn't matter at that moment. All that existed was the two of us, his touch, and the feeling that I was finally alive. After the kiss, I couldn't believe it had happened. We stood on the terrace, surrounded by the silence of the night, and I realized I had taken the first step toward something that would ruin my life. But there was no turning back. "Let's get out of here," he suggested, and I agreed without hesitation. We ended up at his house. Inside, everything was a blur. I don't remember how we got to his apartment, how we ended up in the bedroom. It was like a dream, full of passion and recklessness. I knew this moment would change everything, but I couldn't help myself. Michael had become a kind of obsession that was impossible to resist. That night, I cheated on Jason. When it was over, I lay on my bed, feeling a wave of realization come over me. I had betrayed the man who loved me more than anything in the world. But for all the guilt I felt, there was another feeling, a desire that now completely consumed me. Michael fell asleep next to me, and I stared at the ceiling, not knowing how to go on. That night was the first in a series of events that would completely change my life. After that night, life changed. Going home to Jason's house was an ordeal. I felt like an actress playing a role she wasn't meant to play. Every gesture, every look, every word, everything became part of an elaborate performance that I had to maintain in order to keep what we had. Jason, unsuspecting, continued to be as caring and loving as he had always been. He didn't ask unnecessary questions and his trust in me was boundless. This only added to the weight of my guilt. The morning after my meeting with Michael, I got home after Jason had already left for work. I walked into the house trying to act like nothing had happened. But as soon as I stepped through the door, a wave of guilt swept over me. Everything felt strange and cold. The picture of us together on the wall made my heart ache. I closed my eyes trying to banish thoughts of last night, but they wouldn't go away. I knew Michael was a danger, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. We didn't talk about what had happened anymore, as if it was just one episode that we both chose to forget. But every time I saw him in the office, I felt that same forbidden attraction flare up in me. At work, I tried to behave as professionally as possible, avoiding unnecessary glances and conversations with Michael. We exchanged only formal greetings and brief phrases about work, but there was always a tension between us that everyone around us seemed to sense. I knew that other employees might suspect something, and that made me even more cautious. However, I was finding it increasingly difficult to hold back from seeing Michael. I felt like this secret bond was starting to consume me completely. We met in secluded corners of the office, in places where no one could see us. Every kiss, every moment spent with him seemed necessary to me despite the pain they brought. One evening when Jason was late for work, I met Michael again. This time we decided to meet at a coffee shop near the office. It was risky, but it was even more painful not meeting him. We were sitting at a small table by the window. Michael was calm. He seemed to be in complete control of the situation. I, on the other hand, was nervous, unsure of how to act in this new role. "You look tense, Emily," he said, watching me carefully. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I'm just tired," I answered, trying to smile. But he knew it wasn't true. His penetrating gaze was fixed on my face. "You don't regret what happened?" His voice was quiet, but I could feel the underlying tension in it. I looked at him, not knowing what to say. Of course I was sorry, but it was too hard to admit it. I was conflicted inside. I knew I'd betrayed Jason, but I couldn't deny my feelings for Michael. "I don't know," I said finally. "It's all so confusing." Michael smiled slightly and reached out to touch mine. His touch was warm and soothing, but I knew it would only cause me more pain. Confusing? Or arousing? His voice was soft, almost a whisper, and I felt my barriers begin to crumble again. I couldn't answer. Everything stirred inside me: guilt and desire, duty and passion. I knew I was on the edge, and any wrong move could ruin everything. We sat in the cafe until it got dark. I knew Jason would be home soon and I needed to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to get up. Michael was something forbidden to me but so attractive. I knew this relationship would ruin my life, but I couldn't help myself. When I finally decided to leave, Michael stopped me at the door. He gently took my hand and whispered, "Emily, you know this isn't over." I nodded, feeling everything inside me clench with fear and excitement. I knew it wasn't over, and that scared me more than anything. By the time I got home, it was late. Jason was sitting in the living room watching TV. He greeted me with a smile and kissed me on the cheek. "How was your day?" "What's this?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. "I'm fine, I'm just tired." I tried to speak as calmly as possible so he wouldn't notice anything strange. His voice was neutral, but I sensed a slight suspicion in his tone. "Yeah, a lot of work," I replied, trying not to meet his gaze. We spent the evening as usual, but the tension didn't leave me. I could feel his gaze lingering on me longer than usual, and it made me nervous. I felt like he might suspect something, and I didn't know how to proceed. Last night I couldn't sleep for a long time. Lying next to Jason, I tried to deal with the storm of emotions that was tearing me up inside. I couldn't get Michael out of my head, but neither could Jason. I loved him, but I couldn't control my feelings for the other. This double life was becoming unbearable for me, but I didn't know how to get out of it. Things got even worse when Jason asked me an unexpected question one day. It was in the evening when we were having dinner together. I noticed that he looked thoughtful, and it alerted me immediately. "Emily," he began carefully, as if weighing each word, "you've been distant lately. Are we okay?" The question hit me like a thunderclap. I felt my stomach clench with fear. He sensed something, noticed something. But what was it? "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound as innocent as possible. He put his fork down on the table and looked at me. "It's just that you haven't been the same lately. I can feel you drifting away. You don't laugh as much as you used to, and we hardly talk anymore." His words were like a stab to the heart. I knew he was right, but I couldn't admit the truth. I loved Jason, but my feelings for Michael were destroying everything I was trying to keep. "Jason, we're fine," I said, trying to smile. "I just have a lot of work to do and I'm a little tired." But his gaze was insistent, and I realized he didn't believe my words. "If something's wrong you can tell me," he added quietly. "I'm here and I'll always be here for you." Those words made me struggle to hold back tears. I felt terribly bad about lying to him, but I couldn't tell him the truth. Instead, I nodded and mumbled, "Thanks, Jason. I know." We finished dinner in silence, and I realized that our trust was starting to crack at the seams. Jason had been too kind and considerate to ignore the change in our relationship. I knew things were only going to get more complicated from here on out. But the worst part for me was that I couldn't bring myself to end this dangerous game. Michael continued to occupy all my thoughts, and every text or glance from him became a challenge I couldn't resist. Every day turned into a masquerade during which I tried to keep everything under control, but inside me everything was crumbling. I didn't know how long I could keep this up, but I knew one thing: this story wasn't over. Michael wasn't just a temptation to me, he had become a part of my life that I couldn't erase, no matter the consequences. It had been several months since my affair with Michael had begun. Time had flown by and I was balancing between two lives. Every day this masquerade became more complicated. Jason, despite his kindness and understanding, couldn't help but notice how distant I was becoming. His attention and care became an unbearable burden. But the worst part was the day everything fell apart in an instant. It was an ordinary Friday night. I got home when Jason was already waiting for me with dinner. I felt especially guilty that day. Michael and I had met for lunch, and that meeting had left a mark on my heart and mind. I couldn't stop thinking about him even when I was at home with Jason. We were eating in silence when he suddenly spoke. "Emily, would you mind meeting my coworkers tomorrow? They want to have dinner and I thought it would be a good idea." I froze. Michael was among his coworkers. We'd never crossed paths in their presence, and the thought of having to be with both men at once made me nervous. "Sure," I replied, trying to hide my excitement. "Why not?" Jason looked at me and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite make out. Maybe it was suspicion, but I hoped it was just my paranoia. The next day I was on edge. I put on my best dress, trying to look as casual as possible. Inside I felt like I was on a powder keg. When we got to the restaurant, I noticed Michael right away. He was standing at the bar with Jason's coworkers, smiling and joking as always. When our gazes met, he froze for a second, then smiled slowly at me, as if it were a sign only the two of us could understand. Jason led me over to a table where a few of his friends were already seated. I tried to act natural, but Michael's every move made me uneasy. Every minute I realized that this evening could end in disaster. The conversations at the table were casual, and I was beginning to relax. But when Jason suddenly raised his glass and said, "I'd like to make a toast." His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made me tense. To honesty and dedication, which are so important in life. I looked at him, trying to figure out what he was talking about. In that moment I felt uneasy. He was looking right at me and his gaze was full of tension. "Jason, what are you?" I started, but he interrupted me. His voice was cold and clear. "I know." At that moment time seemed to slow down. My heart beat faster and panic began to rise in my head. "What do you mean?" I tried to stay calm, but my stomach clenched with fear. Jason took a deep breath, setting his glass on the table. "I know about you and Michael," he said, as if he was struggling to say the words. "I've known what was going on for months." Michael froze in place as if he hadn't expected this turn of events. All eyes were on us and I felt my face begin to burn. "Jason, it's not," I started, but he stopped me. "Don't, Emily," he said in a tired voice. "I don't want to hear any more lies. I found your messages, saw how you know. You think I didn't notice anything? I just hoped it wasn't true, that you'd come and tell me yourself." I felt like the whole world was falling apart around me. My mind was in chaos and I didn't know what to do. Michael sat still, his face expressionless, but I knew he was shaken too. "Jason, the words were stuck in my throat. I didn't know how to explain, how to justify myself. His voice was quiet but solid. "You betrayed me. You betrayed us." The words sounded like a sentence. I couldn't look him in the eye, feeling the tears begin to choke me. "I'm leaving," he finally said. "You can stay with Michael if you want. But it's over between us." He stood up without looking at me and walked out of the restaurant, leaving me alone among the people who were now looking at me with sympathy and judgment. Michael tried to say something, but I couldn't hear him. The whole scene was blurring before my eyes and I couldn't breathe. I knew I'd lost Jason forever. Everything I had tried to hide was now revealed. When I was alone, I finally realized what I had done. Michael came over to me and quietly said, "Emily, we need to talk." But I couldn't listen to him anymore. All I had left was the ruins of my life. I got up and walked away without looking back. This chapter of my life was over. But the future seemed frighteningly unknown. And that concludes our story today. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like and leave a comment. Also, we are always happy to discuss any comments you may have. See you in the next video.